All right, why don't I get started with some introductions, and that'll get some time for people to come in, and then we'll get started. So thank you everyone for coming to today's Mixa. We titled it Falling Back, which is what everyone did yesterday at 2 a.m. Navigating the quirks of daylight savings time. So we have two amazing speakers, Matt Steen as well as Hyojin Kim, and they all have two different perspectives on daylight savings, both on a technical and a non-technical way. This session is being recorded. It'll be available on the IBPSA-USA YouTube channel. If you have any questions, if you have any issues hearing the presentation, please try calling in by phone instead of using the computer audio. This is a Mixa, so you will be muted and off camera during the session, but feel free, and I encourage you to post questions in the chat, and I will be monitoring the chat as well as moderating the Q&A afterward. And if you want to click in the chat area, you can see that you can chat everyone in the meeting or just specific people. I'd like to introduce today's presenters. Matt Steen is a research engineer in the Building Technologies and Science Center at NREL, which is the National Renewable Energy Laboratories, where he focuses on developing software for enabling and evaluating high-performance buildings. Previously, he spent 2 years at NREL as an intern and graduate research assistant. Prior to rejoining NREL in 2021, Matt spent 6 years in the private sector, where he provided building energy modeling for code compliance, certification, incentive programs, and building performance goals. He is a building energy modeling professional and has a master's degree in architectural engineering from the University of Colorado Boulder. Our second speaker today will be Dr. Hyojin Kim. She is an associate professor with tenure in the Hillier College of Architecture and Design at the New Jersey Institute of Technology, or NJIT, and a guest researcher at my institution, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. She also serves as the director of the Joint PhD program in Urban Systems at NJIT. She received her PhD degree in architecture at Texas A&M University, and has extensive research experience in the field of energy efficiency, indoor environmental quality, IEQ, or designing next generation built environments. She is a member of ASHRAE, the International Society of Indoor Air Quality, ISIAQ, the International Building Performance Simulation Association, IBPSA, which is the organization sponsoring this event today, and the Society of Building Science Educators. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Matt and Hyojin. Thank you so much. Again, to remind everyone, today's format is going to be a presentation by Matt, then a presentation by Hyojin, and then we will go to an open discussion about their topics or their presentations for about 10 to 20 minutes, and I will moderate that. Afterward, Lori will be closing out our meeting, giving us some announcements, and then we'll have the recording stop at that point and have an open discussion on daylight savings in general. So without further ado, I would like to invite Matt up to the stage.
Thanks. I'm sharing my screen, so let me know if you cannot see it or if it looks bad for any reason.
Yep, we can see it.
So thanks for the intro. Let's see if I can advance this. Yeah, thanks for letting me present on a topic that I've become passionate about recently. As a person, as a father, as an engineer, a citizen. So just a quick summary about the presentation. The views are my own. I'd like to emphasize that there's no like one size fits all in kind of which clock we choose that benefits all people, all organizations, all industries, all the time. And then in this presentation, I'm going to go over some background on daylight saving time and standard time, the pros and cons for each, some legislation happening mostly at the national level around both, and then finishing with as it relates to building energy modeling. So for background, brief history of time in the US, which started around in like the late 1800s with railroad time. That industry decided to kind of agree upon standard time and time zones in the interest of preventing accidents and collisions. That wasn't formally passed at the national level in the US until the early 1900s with what's referred to wartime during World War I, where that standard time was established formally, along with time zones. And then in World War II, the US went to permanent year-round daylight saving time in the interest of saving energy that could be then used for wartime efforts, similar to the reason behind the World War I legislation. And then in the intervening years between World War II and 1966, there really wasn't any federal legislation around daylight saving time. So that resulted in a patchwork of one state starting daylight saving time at one time and maybe a neighboring state starting their daylight saving time at another day of the month, say. And so that led to the Uniform Time Act in 1966, which essentially synchronized the timing of daylight saving time from what was at that time April into October. But states could opt out by passing state law, such as Arizona and Hawaii, who do not observe daylight saving time. And notably, it requires an act of Congress still for a state to observe year-round permanent daylight saving time. And then in the 1970s, as many of us are aware, in the energy industry, there was the 1973 energy crisis, which led to the US trying permanent year-round daylight saving time in 1974 and 1975, but it was kind of reverted back to biannual clock changes after very widespread public opposition. It started kind of in the beginning of the calendar year, so people who hadn't really experienced daylight saving time during the winter months did that for the first time, and it was wildly popular. And then in 2005, many of us are familiar with the Energy Policy Act that extended daylight saving time about a month from the previous timing, and that was from March through November, which we observe now. So I'd like to go over some of the different types of time. There's solar time, which many of us are familiar with from doing solar calculations in college or grad school, or maybe doing solar calculations for our job. There's civil time, which is basically clock time, standardized time for a given location. And then there's also social time. So like what time we have to go to school or work or be there, what time it ends, or for example, when this presentation starts. So moving on to looking at daylight saving time in more detail, some common myths that aren't true. It was not invented by Benjamin Franklin, nor was it invented by farmers, and they don't prefer it. Generally, it was actually invented by an entomologist from New Zealand who wanted more after-work hours for collecting insects. And although this presentation is focused mainly on the US, I just wanted to note that globally, daylight saving time is not observed. I guess in the majority of countries. In the US, we're very familiar with it, but globally, that's not the case. So getting into some benefits of daylight saving time, the one that many of us identify as maybe the top is that there's more daylight during the summer after school and work, or the social time to do fun things. For example, I used to enjoy rock climbing after work pretty frequently when my schedule allowed it. And there has been also small energy savings reported nationally. I'll go into a little bit more detail about that later. And there are also some economic benefits to some industries. for that increased daylight that drives, revenue streams, for example. And some of those industries are golf, chambers of commerce, restaurants, and down that list there. Some of the drawbacks of daylight saving time is that, as I mentioned before, we tried it in 1974. It was very unpopular when, the country experienced daylight saving time during the winter months, which we're not used to. And most importantly are the health effects of having a misalignment between our circadian clock and our social clock. So our sleep health is very dependent on morning light and evening dark, which standard time aligns more closely with. And there are safety kind of effects of that misalignment between our circadian clock and our social clock, where people are perhaps more tired, and there are actually demonstrated increases in traffic accidents and fatalities due to daylight saving time, both acutely around time changes, but also chronically when that is year-round. Moving on to standard time, which is generally the synchronization of clocks within a geographic region, as I mentioned before. Some kind of drawbacks or cons that go along with kind of complement or opposite of the advantages of daylight saving time. Obviously, there's less daylight after school and work to do the things we like to do, and there are less economic benefits for some industries. But similar to the drawbacks of daylight saving time, I think it's the benefits of standard time outweigh the benefits of daylight saving time. So as I mentioned before, it aligns more closely with solar time, which then aligns with our biological and circadian time. And there's a large body of research that supports those health and safety benefits as well. And I'll have a link at the end for that. And there's industry support from doctors and teachers, among many, many others. So the image on the right is demonstrating how daylight saving time can actually kind of force an earlier start to your day. I think it's probably most noticeable in the winter here, where say you have to start work at 8, which is one of the most common work start times. You can see under daylight saving time, you'd have to get up much earlier relative to the sun to get to work on time. So I'd like to briefly cover some of the legislation at the national level. There's often some confusion about the media coverage and just like kind of what's happening currently as far as the national level goes with legislation. So the Sunshine Protection Act has been covered, I guess, relatively well in the media, and that's authored by Senator Rubio from Florida, which would change our clocks basically to permanent year-round daylight saving time. As I mentioned before, it does require an act of Congress to do that. So in 2020, the 2021 version of that act passed the Senate in 2022 by unanimous consent. However, the House, it died in the House, essentially. The House did not take it up or vote on it. And then in this legislative session, it's been currently referred to Senate subcommittees. So on the standard time side of things, we still have the Uniform Time Act. That's in place. It does not require states to observe DST. It allows them to opt out. So it does not require an act of Congress. So importantly, there are lots of state level bills, both on both sides of this kind of question or issue, for permanent standard time or permanent daylight saving time. Some legislation at the state level is just to study the issue for that particular state. And then some states like Colorado, where I am, have passed legislation that relies on a certain number of surrounding states to also choose basically the same clock, either standard time or daylight saving time. So wrapping up with some of the effects of these time changes on energy modeling, our industry here. I'd like to point out two national level reports from federal agencies. The first is from the Department of Transportation, which is, as you can see from the image on the right, quite old. But there's a link there if you'd like to look at it in more detail, which found that the effects were not conclusive, indicated some electricity savings, a slight increase in gasoline savings, and then just a few points that contradict other reports maybe that I wanted to point out just to be a little bit unbiased. They did find that there were ambiguous effects of traffic safety and school children's safety, although this is quite old. There's some newer research available as well. And then, as I mentioned before, widespread popularity for daylight savings in the summer, but not in the winter months. And this was, if I didn't mention it, this was kind of a study that was done after the permanent daylight saving time that occurred in early 1974. And then more recently, the Department of Energy studied the about month or so extension of daylight saving time that happened with the Energy Policy Act of 2005 that went into effect in 2007. So that report, again, for that extension time, found that there was a very small total electricity savings, 0.03%, and then also a very small primary energy consumption savings, and then statistically insignificant transportation energy. I think this is my last slide, but I just wanted to point out some energy effects of daylight saving time versus standard time and how that might affect building energy modeling that could potentially spur some discussion for later. So some of these effects could be the overlap of solar time, the external loads on a building with the social time, that when the building is open, when it's closed, and that alignment or misalignment. There are location-specific savings that can occur. I covered some national level reports, but there are both like state level or regional studies that have found both savings and increases in energy consumption for one time or the other, and that can happen for kind of the location of a building or a region within a time zone, east or west. And then also there are building specific savings that can occur. As we all know, buildings are very diverse. So maybe on the residential side, which are typically more externally load driven, the solar time might come into more play, whereas on the commercial side, which are typically more internally load driven, the building operations schedule could kind of drive those loads. And then there's the added complexity of time adjustments for our simulation software, and then the building data, time series data, for example, that I believe our next speaker is going to talk about. So thank you everyone for listening. And just a few references and resources, a link, the Safe Standard Time, which is an organization that has a lot of good information. I'm not aware of any on the other side organizations that advocate for daylight saving time, although there is much like industry specific lobbying and groups that are around that. So don't forget that SimBuild is coming to Denver next May.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
everyone.
Matt. I think you have to mute so I don't have echo. All right. So Matt, I did mute you because I was getting a little echo from your mic. But thank you so much for that presentation. Fascinating history. I certainly had a lot of myths debunked, so I'll have questions for those. So as a reminder for everyone, please put your questions in the chat. I will moderate that. The Q&A portion after our second speaker. So Hyojin, take it away.
Okay, can you hear me well?
Yep, and I can see your slides.
Yep, thank you. Thank you, Matt, for your great presentation and then introducing my topic today. So hello, everyone. My name is Hyojin Kim, and it's my great pleasure to participate in this well-timed webinar focused on daylight saving time. So I hope everyone enjoyed the extra hour yesterday. For me, I suddenly felt like I transformed into a morning person, which is pretty nice. And by the way, while I prepare for this webinar, I discovered that the correct term for DST is daylight saving time without the S for savings, so which I was not aware of. So I just wanted to share this with you first. Okay, so before jumping right into the topic, I'd like to briefly introduce myself. So as Lisa mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I hold my PhD in architecture from Texas A&M University, and I have obtained my other degrees in South Korea. So to be relevant to today's topic, I'd like to mention that I was born and raised in a country where we do not observe daylight saving time. So now some of you may imagine that how much trouble I've encountered with daylight saving time during my PhD and even while preparing this talk today. So I'm currently an associate professor at NJIT, and I am also the associate dean for research within the Hillier College of Architecture and Design and coordinating our PhD program in urban systems. And I had been a guest researcher at NIST and working closely with Lisa's team on their net zero house. And during this process, Lisa and I have occasionally had conversations about daylight saving time concerning the data collected from various data loggers at their house to ensure proper data synchronization. And I believe this interaction just prompted Lisa to contact me regarding this webinar today. So at NJIT, I have my own research lab, B2 lab, building energy and built environment. And at the lab, we conduct research on building energy efficiency and indoor environmental quality, which includes both building energy simulation and field measurements of various building operation data. And this has always made me think about today's topic, how to properly handle daylight saving time in my time series data and in my simulation. So in my presentation today, I am going to use a few acronyms. DST stands for, of course, the daylight saving time, and I don't think I need to define it. LST stands for local standard time without DST adjustments, while LDT, local daylight time, stands for time with daylight saving time adjustments, including the 1 hour forward change during the DST periods. So I'd like to begin my talk by discussing how daylight saving time is currently used in building energy modeling, the BEM simulation. And for that, I have an Energy Plus example, one of the most commonly used building energy simulation programs, which I believe most of you are aware of or use for your projects. And I should mention first that my experience with other programs like lighting simulation or airflow simulation is limited, so I cannot speak about them in terms of how they handle daylight saving time in their simulation. However, I think it would be interesting to hear from experts in other areas later. So in terms of Energy Plus accepts weather files describing daylight saving time periods. And for that, users need to specify if they'd like to use daylight saving time period by using the object run period by entering yes to the field named use weather file daylight saving period. However, it's important to note that daylight saving time periods are not specified in typical the EPW, the Energy Plus weather files available on the Energy Plus website. So the next question is, what should we do when we use weather files that do not specify daylight saving time periods? Well, it's not a big issue because the Energy Plus users can simply designate a DST period in their Energy Plus input file by using another object called run period control daylight saving time. And there are two fields such as start day and end date. So for example, for start day, you can say that it's second Sunday of March, and end date can be defined as the first Sunday of November. And this object will override any DST period specified in the weather file. And only one DST period per input file is allowed. And however, while preparing for this webinar, I noticed that the DST becomes inactive, the daylight saving time becomes inactive the next day of the end date specified in this field, the end date. Therefore, you should be careful with this input. For example, if you have first Sunday in November for this input field, as I have on this screenshot, that means Energy Plus disables DST beginning from Monday. And I also noticed that the US DOE reference buildings have first Sunday in November as their default input for this field. So just wanted to share this another new finding with you today. And when the daylight saving time is active, it basically means that all scheduled items in Energy Plus that are defined, for example, using the object schedule compact, shipped by 1 hour during daylight saving time. In other words, the schedule skips forward an hour on the spring forward day and repeats an hour on the fall back day. So if you define your schedule using the other object, what's called schedule file, you now have ability to turn it on or off by defining this input field, what's called adjust schedule for daylight savings here. So if you have yes, that means Energy Plus will shift your scheduled items 1 hour during DST period. If you have no, then it's not going to make that time adjustment in their simulation. However, if you define your object using schedule compact, you don't have that functionality, the ability to turn it on and off within your simulation. So what's the problem with the current the workflow, how the Energy Plus handles the DST in their simulation? So I want to share some of my thoughts on that from now on. So again, basically, if you designate DST period in Energy Plus, that means the schedule skips forward an hour on the spring forward day and repeats an hour on the fallback day. However, in reality, they do not occur. So that's my point. So for example, let's say this is my spring forward day. And then if I say yes for DST adjustment in my schedule file, it means in the actual simulation, Energy Plus will skip one of the fraction here, which is defined for 1 a.m. on spring forward day. In the other hand, for the fallback day, what Energy Plus will do is it's going to repeat one of the scheduled values, such as 0.2 in this example, which is the scheduled value for 1 a.m. twice in their simulation. And again, I think this is an issue because a repeating schedule does not really occur in reality. However, if you use the actual data for your scheduled item that was measured in LDT with daylight saving time observation, then you don't have any other option, and then you have to use this schedule adjustment option when you define your schedule, because you don't basically have the data for 1 a.m. On spring forward day, but for back day, you're kind of repeating the data. So again, if you have the data measured in LDT, then it will always have the spring forward gap and fall back overlap. So as an example, I just brought the data, this imaginary data that are measured in LST here. And this is my spring forward day. And but if you have this data measured in the LDT with daylight saving time observation, basically you will skip from 1:59 a.m. to 3 a.m. So for the hourly data, you're going to have a gap right here. However, on fallback day, when the clocks tick from 1:59 a.m. back to 1 a.m., basically you have two options. You can use either 0 a.m. data or 1 a.m. data for your measure data in LDT. So it is very ambiguous how to handle the fallback overlap in actual data, unless you just want to repeat the same timestamp. So if we also think about the alpha files in Energy Plus, in terms of what happens to our Energy Plus alpha files when DST is active, even though the DST, the daylight saving time being in effect for schedulers and controls, however, in your alpha files, the timestamps will always remain in LST without daylight saving time adjustments. So that means basically users have to post-process your hourly or sub-hourly output data from LST without DST observation to LDT with the DST adjustment, including the issues like spring forward gap and fallback overlap issues as necessary. And at this point, I just felt like, oh, it's too much, and it kind of drives me crazy, and start thinking about I just cannot keep it up, and then let's pick one and just use them. So my question is, how about disabling the DST and then manually adjusting the Energy Plus schedule during the DST period? So in other words, we don't designate a DST period in Energy Plus info file and define schedule file in LST without daylight saving time adjustment, and also define the schedules using schedule compact hour, but during a daylight saving time period separately in LST. So in other words, what I'm thinking is, what happens if we just use all the weather files will be in LST, then if we define and use schedules in LST, and then if we have alpha files in both LST and LDT, to me, it sounds more reasonable and better workflow. So in terms of the weather files in LST, the local standard time without, again, the daylight saving time adjustment, I think it's important to have a uniform time convention for different weather files, even the measured weather files, if we want to create and use actual meteorological year data. And this is important, again, for consistency and also proper synchronization of different weather data sources. However, the different weather data sources currently have different time convention. We all know and familiar that NOAA has they have data in LST. However, some third-party data sources, they are defined in collected in LDT. So again, the users have to pay close attention to this when they process the different data sources. And in terms of schedules in LST, again, for the same reason, I think it's important to use a uniform time convention. And in the field, I often found that the data loggers synchronize with the computer clock time when they are set up or reset. And resetting data loggers randomly can introduce an unintentional mixed use of time convention in terms of both LST and LDT. And it's very typical that multiple loggers are frequently used in highly instrumented buildings. So again, it's kind of introducing some additional unnecessary complexity in our building performance data sets. And in terms of the output files, I think it will be nice if we have an option to generate the BEM output files both in LST and LDT to improve the usability of the program. So, and I think it's important because the output files in LST will not have any gap or overlap issues. And output files in LDT are also important for proper interpretation of those time-related data in terms of occupant-driven the schedules. So to recap, to me, LST and LDT, they are like a dual unit system. I do not like them much, and it's not convenient, it's additional complexity. However, I felt we need to know both and process data in two different formats for different purposes. In the current DST adjustment in BAM, they usually work well for occupant-driven schedules, making little to no difference in an annual level simulation. However, they may have an impact on hourly or sub-hourly simulation using measured data for a short period of simulation, for example, calibrate simulation or control studies. So therefore, again, what I'm thinking is it's important to have a uniform time convention regarding how to handle daylight saving time, either for both measured weather data and also building performance data. And it will be nice to have an option to generate the BEM output files both in LST and LDT. So that's the end of my presentation today. And like Matt, I have the sim build, so don't forget. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much to both our speakers. We have a robust conversation in the chat, but before I get there, one thing I want to ask Matt, did you know that it's not daylight savings time? I wasn't paying attention during your presentation. Was there an S after saying saving?
There shouldn't have been. I might have, slipped a mistake in there, but yeah, I intentionally had it singular.
Oh, see, I learned so much. First of all, that it's not for farming and that there's no S after savings. Those are two excellent points. Thank you for that. That'll be great for trivia night, I think. So going back to the chat, we had so thank you again, both of you. Very awesome history of daylight saving time, as well as the implications for energy modeling, which I agree with you, Hyojin. It is, I'm already confused. So thank you for dealing with that at our test house. Karen wrote that there has been studies looking at part year effects, and that one study in March and April, a little one in October, but that heating and cooling is used more. Oh, there's Karen on screen. Do you mind explaining?
Yeah, I mean, the big issue when people quote these federal studies is we have no year-round federal studies. So the 1974, basically looked at winter time for a few months. It was back in 1974 when there was an oil crisis going on. So already people were not allowed to put their heaters on to full steam and things like that. So there's a lot of issues with that not sort of representing what we'd see today. We also use a lot different electronics and light sources than we use today. And then the 2008 study, which is a little bit obviously more recent and more timely, was only looking at the extension period. So while they showed, a small potential savings in energy, and that's very frequently quoted by politicians, it did not look at the winter. It did not look at the summer, which is when the sort of increase in energy use would be most expected. So there's a number of studies. Probably the most relevant is this one out of Indiana by Cochin that found about a 1% increase in residential energy use related related to increases in heating and cooling. And there were stories like this back in 1974. There were news reports of school systems that suddenly found that their heating bills were going up because now instead of turning on, their heat at 6 a.m., which used to be 7 a.m. Now it was, 6, now it's 6 a.m., which used to be 5 a.m. So, they're starting to warm up these buildings when they were already, let's say 10 degrees colder outside. And so, so those effects are not fully analyzed when it comes to these studies. And then the other issue is people sleep about 19 minutes less on average when the sun rises and sunsets are later. And so people that are awake, especially these days, are now on computers and iPads and switches and pick your device, if not 5 of them at the same time. So again, we need an updated analysis, but especially with the increased use of heating and cooling, it looks like there should be increase not only in those costs but also the pollution related to it. So the Indiana study touched on increases in pollution related to these increased in energy costs. And again, we don't have great gasoline data, but like the National Convenience Store guy estimates that even seasonal daylight savings time, I think it's like what, Jay, $5 billion more in gasoline use with daylight savings time. So at least the gasoline companies think that people drive more when it's light later. So again, the climate issues related to that.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Karen, do you mind telling us what your affiliation is?
I work at UMass. I'm the vice president of Safe Standard Time. I'm the co-chair of the Coalition of Permanent Standard Time. So I'm with a bunch of these other people on the screen here.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Thank you for that. And then Zoe, did you want to follow up with any questions you had on what Karen said, since I saw you ask a question in the chat, Zoe?
Thanks, Lisa. I don't know if I have one specific question or comment. I'm just like fascinated by some of the implications here. I don't know is there anyone on here who can speak to like modeling, whether it's like peak loads or like grid balancing, or modeling like utility scale things that are thrown off by or need to make sure the time zones and daylight saving time or lack thereof is accounted for, or anything interesting that comes up with it with modeling?
Yeah, maybe Matt or Hyojin could take this question, looking at what kind of the biggest impact is.
I'm trying to think if I've experienced that. I certainly don't have experience on kind of like the maybe community scale or utility scale that you were mentioning, Zoe. On the building modeling side, I think we kind of touched on it in the chat. David was mentioning, if you're doing an existing building, maybe doing calibrated energy model, where you're using actual meteorological year weather data, that's something that you want to be aware of, is whether or not, well, are you in Arizona or Hawaii where there is no daylight saving time? And then, most likely if you are in a place that observes it, is that accounted for in your weather data? And then also your building schedules and making sure everything's falling where it needs to be for your people, your lights, your equipment, and you don't want it to be off for half the year. So
Great, thank you. So I'll put this question to you, Hyojin. There was a call to perhaps use UTC instead, as well as a recent question about Unix timestamps instead.
Correct. The UTC, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So to me, UTC is like another unit system. It's not very intuitive compared to the local standard time. So I personally, I know some data sources, they use UTC, and then it gives me another headache in addition to the daylight saving time. to me, my preference is, as I mentioned, like the local standard time, because it's at least intuitive for winter months. And then anyway, the energy plus output is going to be local standard time. And regarding the question about the hourly calibrate simulation, yes, I did that experience previously. And basically what I did is I'm just using local standard time without the daylight saving time adjustments. And then it's simpler for me and straightforward because I don't have to worry about the data shifting and then the defining the daylight saving time for different years. And that's kind of another headache to me. So.
All right, thank you. So let's see. So Mike, I saw you very active in the chat about UTC as well. Would you like to jump in and tell us more about your thoughts on UTC?
Well, I've taught a course on daylight saving time for some OLLI chapters, OSHA Lifelong Learning Institute, and I've just been tracking this for a couple of years, and I don't think we'll ever get to UTC in my lifetime. Hopefully we'll get to standard time. Not much else there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Do you mind telling us your affiliation?
Retired at home.
Oh, amazing. Congrats.
Thank you.
And then David, you had a question about hourly calibration with AMY. Do you want to expound on that, or was that a snarky comment?
Well, it's just like if there's two things like I ask always, like, is it a leap year because things will get messed up then sometimes, and then if you're doing a time series calibration and it happens to be on one of those days, that's particularly bad, right? Or challenging, I guess, depending upon understanding like what's being used for the weather file. I mean, in theory, right, there's still, I don't know for sure. I would think Energy Plus would properly map to the right hour in the weather file, but the data like from the building doesn't change in the middle of the day necessarily. So yeah, if everything's in standard time for the purposes of the simulation, it makes that easier. Another thing I've seen happen sometimes is if people are post-processing 8760 output data and they're looking at a date that's after daylight savings time is in effect, they might be off an hour and they might be thinking, and they don't realize it. And so that's a mistake I've seen happen a lot of times where the hourly graphs are off by an hour because they're just running a script that's dividing up the 8760 into 24-hour chunks and doesn't offset once daylight savings time starts.
Gotcha. Yes, Jay.
So I have worked as a software engineer, primarily building websites in my professional career. I'm currently the president of the nonprofit Safe Standard Time, however, advocating for permanent standard time. I just wanted to throw in that when I was working as a software engineer for website companies, they would always give me these tasks because they knew I enjoyed it. And there were so many mistakes that people would only record the current local time, but not record if it was standard or daylight time. And then you have to think about, well, what's the date? And then, the dates of the clock changes change. So you got to know which year and are they different now? I see all the time on websites that they're punching out my time on a timestamp for, I don't know, a purchase of something, and they'll quote it as Pacific Standard Time, even though it's currently Pacific Daylight Time. And then if you convert that to Pacific Daylight Time, but it was already in daylight time, so now you're another hour off. There's all kinds of nonsense and confusion that people don't anticipate. And these are just websites. Your work arguably would be more important. It's so thank you for this discussion. It's the legislators really need to hear about these complications. They don't realize how complicated and needlessly expensive daylight saving time can make the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for giving us your affiliation as well. And then let's see, we have a new question in the chat from Mike. What's the difference between UTC and standard time, other than GMT being a time zone and UTC being a standard? What does adoption of UTC mean to you? Oh, okay, Mike first and then Jay go second.
Go ahead, Jay, please.
Well, so UTC stands for Coordinated Universal Time. The order of the words don't match English or French, which was the compromise between the English and the French at the time. So UTC is the same thing as GMT. It's it's the same time on the clock. It's defined as Greenwich Mean Time. So that's the mean solar time in Greenwich, England, where the Royal Observatory is. It's mean because the solar time varies slightly depending on what day of the year it is. So we take the mean of all days of the years to get the local mean solar time in Greenwich. But a lot of people in England say GMT year round when they actually should be saying GMT in the winter and BST, British summertime, in the summer. So it can be also confusing to say GMT. So UTC is a little more clear as to what you mean. So where I am in Phoenix, Arizona, it's currently coming up on 2 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. So we have here our standard time is Mountain Standard Time, which is 7 hours behind UTC. So if we had permanent standard time, then we would have throughout the mountain time zone in Denver, in Cheyenne, in Albuquerque, they would all be on UTC minus 7 hours. But UTC around the globe is always UTC. It's universal. It's always the time set in Greenwich, England. Although it might be off by a few seconds. That's a little more technical than I can handle.
Great. Zoe, did that answer your question, or did you have any follow-up?
I think that was it. I was just a little bit confused by hearing, like, I think it was Mike saying, and maybe I'm misinterpreting, but saying, like, he favors adoption of UTC, but that might be complicated, and saying that that he'll settle for adoption of standard time. So I wasn't sure what the difference there was.
Oh, so one more thing. So like I was saying, right now in Phoenix, Arizona, it's coming up on 2 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. In Chicago, it's coming up on 3, and in New York, it's coming up on 4. UTC, it's coming up on 9 o'clock at night. So if you're recording timestamps in UTC, bonus, the pro is that they never change with this daylight saving time. The con is that it's 9 o'clock at night UTC, but it's 2 p.m. locally. So you don't always know, like, is it the middle of the day? Is it sunset? Is it midnight? You have to know your time zone offset, how far away you are, how many degrees east or west of Greenwich.
Gotcha. And that's why Hyojin was saying how UTC is like another unit of measure, because yeah, it's not intuitive. I think we'll go with one. If anyone has more questions, feel free to raise your hand, put them in the chat. Otherwise, I'll give each of our speakers a question, and then we'll let Lori end today's Mixa recorded session part, and then we can have a little more open discussion after the recording is done on what you really feel about daylight saving time. So for Matt, are you still there? There you are. So I was really intrigued by that sun chart that you had shown. You know, I had never really understood why standard time outweighs daylight saving time in terms of that. But could you just go over that a little? Because I know we only gave you like 15 minutes, but could you go over that again with us about that sun pattern and circadian rhythm?
Yeah, let me bring that up again. I just closed my presentation, but those graphics were from Jay and his organization.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
he can probably explain it better than I can, but because it is confusing, I know. The phrase that it forces early waking, is that what you're maybe getting at?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Let me try sharing my screen again. Get back to that. And I think there's this one here that
I think it's the one with the 4 and it looks like a rainbow of sun going across.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. So let me get over here. Just move it. Yeah. So what I was trying to, I guess, explain here. So 8 o'clock is in the morning. 8 a.m. is a very common kind of like work start time for people. So we'll kind of look at the worst case scenario in the winter time, daylight saving time, where we're not used to that. We haven't experienced that unless you were old enough in like 1974 to experience that. So here under standard time, if we go to work at say 8 o'clock, we're getting up maybe an hour earlier where the sun's just starting to come up, like right here, right on the horizon. Whereas under daylight saving time, if you're going to work at 8 o'clock, again, this is like kind of social time, you're getting up, before the sun is above the horizon or starting to light up the sky. Does that answer your question? Maybe Jay can explain it better than I can.
Well, so with standard time, astronomically, we're counting 12 p.m., 12 noon as when the sun is at its highest and most southerly point. And then we divide the hours evenly in the morning and afternoon from there. So someone got a bright idea and said, hey, if we turn the clocks forward an hour in the summer, everybody will go to work an hour earlier. We can leave work an hour early, have more time in the evening for daylight in the summer. But as we've extended it into the winter now, most people are going to the median work arrival time in the U.S. is 7:55 a.m. So most people are starting work at 8. In the winter, that's just after sunrise. But if we had daylight time with the hours turned forward, the clocks turned forward, 8 o'clock would be just before sunrise instead. So with daylight time, it's kind of like the government setting your alarm clock an hour early. And I don't think most people want to do that in the winter for sure.
Gotcha. All right, thank you. Hyojin, one last question for you. How did you, so thank you for digging into all this, especially this Energy Plus details, because those are things I didn't realize either, except especially that setting of daylight savings in that object. So can you give us an example, maybe with the net zero house, since we worked on together, like how difficult and how many different kind of conversions you had to do to get like one good solid answer? Like what's the energy use?
That's a great question. But yeah, I think it's great if I can explain better with some examples like the NIST Net Zero House. And this net zero house is really well managed, and then it has the permanent data loggers collecting some TDMS, the time series data from the house, and they are those data loggers are reset every 0 a.m. So right, yeah, 001 a.m. So it's reset. So in terms, and then it's basically following the clock time. So in with daylight saving time adjustment like LDT. But meanwhile, there are some other data loggers more like installed later to collect more data sets for specific purposes. And those data loggers are not kind of not really connected to the central system. So that means those data loggers are controlled through like some a person, and then can have different timestamp depending on when those data loggers are reset. So in the process, we found that sometimes even though the data said it's collected in LDT with daylight saving time, the data actually tells me it actually was collected in LST without daylight saving time adjustment. So that means we have to compare two different data sources for common variable and always chase when the daylight saving time was in effect or not. Yeah, so you can imagine that it's a lot of trouble, especially when you have multiple data loggers at the same building, and then collecting, and then if you don't have any common variable collected from two different data loggers, basically there's no way you can reveal whether which time convention these data sources are following. So, but at the same time, I think I like the EPW weather files or NOAA weather data when I build my AMY file, because they are always in local standard time without daylight saving time adjustment. So it's very straightforward, and there's no, we don't skip 1 hour, we don't repeat 1 hour. So to me, that's clear. So my question is, can we just collect those building performance data in local standard time without daylight saving time adjustment? Then everything will use the same time convention, and if needed, we can. It's easier to convert from LST to LDT, but the other way is not straightforward. So because you don't have data basically one timestamp. So that was my argument, my thoughts about how to handle it. But I think different. I want to hear from other software like lighting analysis or airflow analysis, because Lisa, sometimes Lisa is running the content airflow modeling and send me the data. Then I always have to double check. Lisa, are they in with the daylight saving time adjustment or without? If she gave me some infiltration data, I need to ask her, Lisa, is it DST or LST or LDT? Always the same question. And whenever I hire my research assistants, I always have to going through this process, like training them how to handle those DST issue in building performance data. And then even people, my students from USA, they are confused with all the different adjustment, and they didn't realize basically how much complexity the DST is bringing into our data management and processing. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for that. And we'll officially thank Matt and Hyojin for their time today. Thank you so much. If you want to stick around for our off-the-record conversation, please feel free to do so. But Lori, I'd like to turn it back to you to close out the official recorded portion of our Mixa.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And thank you to our speakers today and everyone who's joined us today as well. Please be sure to check out the SimBuild 2024 website. Consider submitting an oral presentation or a panel discussion. And we are looking forward to seeing everyone in Denver in May. For those of you who are watching us on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you'd like to follow up with us, please feel free to reach out at admin@IBPSA-US. And just want to say thanks to everyone today who has joined this discussion, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right, thank you so much. So Lori, you can go ahead and stop the recording, and I'll